Welcome to Green and Red, scrappy politics for scrappy people, a regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
Welcome to the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. Your co-host Scott Parkin in Berkeley, California today. And Bob is off on assignment, unable to join us today, but we look forward to his return soon. Today, we're going to be talking about something we've done a couple of shows on in the past, multiple shows over the last year and a half, which is about the state's war on the Stop Cop City movement. In the past, we've talked about the assassination of the forest defender who was killed by the Georgia and Atlanta police, the state's backlash against the movement that's fought the construction of this multi-million-dollar police training facility in southeastern Atlanta, and then a number of activists who've been charged with domestic terror and included on a huge RICO case, which is against over 60 activists. And so joining us today is Priscilla Grim, who is actually one of those defendants. She is a Nuyorican mom, comrade, and activist based in Brooklyn, New York. She has written for Scalawag, the Indypendent, and is written in forthcoming anthologies, No Cop City, No Cop World, and World War III Now. Priscilla, welcome to the Green and Red podcast.
Hello, Scott. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you here. Maybe just we can kick off and just for our listeners, give us a little bit of a brief background of some of the activist work that you've done.
So I was a day one organizer with Occupy Wall Street. I worked with the media crews and helped promote and get into the consciousness the We Are the 99% Tumblr blog. I also served as a founding editor for the Occupied Wall Street Journal.
Nice.
Yeah, and have worked since then with the social media teams of what remains of the Occupy Wall Street social media network. I have worked on several different campaigns in the New York area, most recently to try and get the New York Heat Act passed, which would be one of the greenest legislations in the United States. It would have put New York at the forefront of bringing together new possibilities outside of fossil fuels. Before that, I was communications director for the mayoral candidate, Art Chang. And I was communications lead for Citizens Union and worked on the Vote Yes for the State Constitutional Convention campaign, which was an unusual and interesting campaign of possibility again. And currently I'm working as the communications lead for Beautiful Trouble, the international activist nonviolent training, strategic nonviolent direct action training group, Beautiful Trouble.
And maybe we could get a little bit into, I suspect most of our listeners are familiar with Cop City, but let's just do a little bit of background in case we have any new listeners who are less familiar with Cop City and Stop Cop City. If you want to talk about what is Cop City, what's happening there, that sort of thing. And maybe we can also talk a little bit about an update on some of the politics around it right now.
Sure. So the original Cop City, which it's important to understand, this is only one of over 60 facilities being planned throughout the United States right now. It is a public safety training facility, which has not been built yet. The project started in the state of Georgia, where 11 other public safety training facilities already exist. One state, 11 training facilities for police. But what makes this facility...
So 11 of the 60 are in Georgia?
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Georgia has... No. Georgia has one big cop city that's trying to build, which is actually... It mirrors this training facility called Gaza City in Israel, which is interesting and terrifying. But the other Cop City projects throughout the United States are their own beast. So they're all like these fake cities. Georgia has 11 public safety training facilities. Like they're trying to call this the Atlanta Public Safety Training Facility. And if you actually go to the public safety training website for the state of Georgia, they used to have a map that showed 11 other facilities that have already been built in the state. They have 11 police training facilities in the entire state of Georgia. New York, I think we only have 2 or 3. And what makes the Atlanta one extra special is that the plans, the idea, the vision of the people of the Atlanta Police Foundation who's building this is that it is a fake neighborhood, fake school, fake playground, a total mock city in order to practice urban warfare on people, on communities, with dozens of shooting ranges and a Black Hawk helicopter landing pad. They're literally training for urban warfare. And if you go back even further, the demand to build cop cities seems to have come from the corporate masters of ALEC, the American Legislative Council. I forgot what
Exchange Committee, I think.
Yes, in the wake of the 2020 uprisings. And even more interesting, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp is an alum of ALEC. So this is an important campaign because this type of militarized facility is not limited to the state of Georgia. Since the Stop Cop City movement formed, again, as we talked about, over 60 other cop cities have been proposed or in some way being put together to be built. And
we have one here in the Bay Area in San Pablo. We're calling it Cop Campus.
Yeah. And in New York City, our mayor just announced that he wants to build one in Queens, what's in the borough of Queens of New York City. What's really terrifying about this is because in the 90s and the early aughts, the big push was to build jails and prisons all over the US, right? And we've seen what that has done to communities all over the United States. Like we have enormously, just crazy amounts of incarceration. Lots of people, millions of people are affected by this every single day. And that was the outcome of that. So I don't want to be sitting here in 10 years looking at the United States and seeing urban warfare happening on communities all over the place, which is what they're training and preparing to do. So when the Stop Cop City movement started in Atlanta, I understood it, and many other people did, to be a principled, decentralized movement, much like Occupy Wall Street, led by Black and Indigenous people based in Atlanta. And it has broad support, this movement, among directly affected people in the city, as evidenced by the fact that more people signed a referendum to put the question of building Cop City on the ballot than those who voted for the current mayor, Andre Dickens. So as a direct result of the brutal repression of the people of Atlanta and their quest to stop the project and the plans to build cop cities across the United States, the movement has grown across the country to fight these facilities being planned to stop people from. This is happening at a time where we are a nation of renters without rent control. We are a nation going through whatever on nation, like we're living on Turtle Island. You and I are very much affected by policies in the United States. We just got through a pandemic without Medicare for all becoming rule of the land. And I
would argue we're still in the pandemic.
We're still in the pandemic. We're absolutely still in the pandemic and being threatened by a second one that's about to happen. Still, we don't have Medicare for all. People are in indentured servitude, myself included, with student loan debt. So we don't have housing, we don't have health care, we barely have education. For myself and a lot of others, we see these cop cities that are popping up as specifically being built to fight people from trying to get resources that they desperately need. Yeah.
A pretty common theme that we have on the show is the increasing, not just cop cities, which I have another question about Cop City, about the model that's based on, but we're also seeing anti-pipeline protest legislation. We're seeing, civil litigation against organizations like Greenpeace, and civil litigation against the Stop Mountain Valley Pipeline protests. and things like that. And so we're actually seeing the elite begin to weaponize laws and then build out this militarized police state. And but the model, my question about the model, and you referred to this a minute ago, is the model is basically based on what the Israelis have been doing with the Palestinians for like at least since the second intifada, if not the first intifada. It's basically like a patrol and control and quash dissent and resistance, and in the case of the Israelis, an entire group of people.
Yeah. You could argue the prison industrial complex in the United States is a genocide against Black and brown people, because that's who gets caught up in it mainly, far and away above any other groups in the United States.
And so with the Cop City campaign, how long has it been going on? How long have they been waging this on the ground sort of battle against Cop City?
Honestly, I really am unclear of how long it exactly has been going on. I found out about the project, about the campaign in 2022 through news stories that were floating around online about the people of Atlanta testifying for hours at city council meetings, demanding that the project be stopped. And it really resonated with me as someone who really once believed that public engagement with elected officials could work for the benefit of the people. If enough people show up and voice their concerns, these elected officials should listen and respond accordingly, right? But in New York City, in our fight to stop 5 new jails that came out of the Close Rikers campaign, after a full-on takeover of the city council vote, after months of campaigning by city residents, our city council here voted to pass funding for 5 new jails, not close Rikers. They said that they were going to close Rikers, but not only has it not closed, but they're renovating it. We don't need those jails, and it's only going to bring a bigger dangerous reality to people of color in New York City. I'm unsure how long the campaign was going on, but when it started, but I very much became aware of it in 2022.
And it has a multitude of targets. There's where they've been targeting the elected officials in Atlanta, which are Democrats, just for people out there. It's not white Republicans like Brian Kemp, although he's also, very much behind it. Yeah. And then it's also targeted the Atlanta Police Foundation, and it's targeted various construction companies doing the work. And we could talk a lot about the corporate campaigns or even the campaign against the Atlanta Police Foundation, but the more interesting part is the campaign, which is actually coming. There's an element of people who were from out of town who have been involved in this campaign, and there's an element where this campaign has happened in other parts of the country related to these companies. But the sort of like on the ground being led by people in Atlanta against the elected officials, like this ballot initiative or referendum or state referendum or whatever it is more interesting. Like these elected Democrats are actually trying to quash that through legal means, correct?
Yes, absolutely. As far as the campaign targets, I'm unsure about all of them. I can only tell you about what I've read about online.
There's dozens of them as far as the companies go.
Dozens of them, but they have been successful in that Reeves Young Construction, Quality Gas Company, and Atlas Technical Consultants have all exited the project due to public pressure in different ways. So that's enormously exciting that the people can go to pressure corporations and the corporations will listen to them. Why won't the elected officials, right? The city government has very much been trying to shut down this referendum, which was going to put the question of Cop City on the ballot. What's even more interesting is that the building of Cop City is happening in DeKalb County, but the people who would be voting on the question of funding it are in Fulton County. The people whose neighborhood it's being built in don't even have the ability to vote on it, if it even comes to a referendum. But so what they're doing is very real and frightening. So again, more people signed this referendum crafted by the Cop City Vote campaign than voted for the current mayor. So Andre Dickens received a little over 50,000 votes. Cop City Vote campaign got over 116,000 people who signed the referendum to put it on the ballot. So those people have effectively been doxxed by the city of Atlanta when someone in the county clerk's office accidentally leaked all of their information online. And right now the vote is in limbo, and there's no known timeline for what happens next. None. It's just fallen to the side. Who knows what happens next?
It's just unbelievable. And this is a group of people who pride themselves on how they helped carry Georgia for Biden and elected two U.S. senators, a black man and a Jew, to the Senate. And they often evoke Martin Luther King Jr., who is from Atlanta, right?
Yes. Yes. And his daughter has come out, has been like, why can't we at least just vote on this? Just put it on the ballot already. Allow people to vote on it. This is the Carter Center for Democracy. The Carter Center is there. Yeah, priding themselves on what is democracy. This is at
the New South. Core. Jim Crow is gone, but Cop City is here to is to keep Jim Crow in place.
Yes, very much. Very much.
So my next question is, you were arrested there in 2023, I believe. Can you talk about what you were charged with?
Yes. So I was arrested at the South River Music Festival on March 5th, 2023. I was charged with domestic terrorism, a charge that I was unaware that I was being given until I arrived at jail. And I'm now one of the 42 people charged with domestic terrorism, and I still haven't been indicted on that charge. So it's just floating there. So I have 4 years for them to make up their minds what they want to do with that. And then months later, I was included in the largest state level racketeering, otherwise known as RICO indictment, with 60 other people.
It's a criminal RICO, right?
Yes, it's a criminal. Is there a non-criminal RICO?
There's civil RICO, actually.
Weird. Okay. I had no idea. Yeah. So I'm not a lawyer.
It's actually what Chevron went after Stephen Donziger and many Ecuadorians on, civil RICO.
Yeah. They're pulling out all the stops, aren't they? They know that their days are over. Like, this way of treating people. There's more of us than there are of them. Yeah. And they can't. One thing that really brings me hope is that since 2011, over 15 state prisons in New York State have been closed. And they have been closed not because of legislation, not because an elected official was like, we need to close prisons, but because people don't want to work in prisons. That is why they closed, because they couldn't find people to work in them. And so as a result, our incarceration rates have gone down, which is incredibly hopeful. There's many ways in which the system is vulnerable, and we just have to figure out those ways. And one of them is just not participating.
And when you're part of this criminal RICO, you've been charged with this domestic terror, but not indicted. And how long were you in jail for? And where were you in jail?
So for the unindicted charge that I still have not been indicted on, I spent 31 days in DeKalb County Jail. I was denied bond 3 times. I was terrified. I thought I was going to be there for months. And then when I was indicted on the RICO charge, I spent 27 hours at Fulton County Jail, where to date, I think 11 or 12 people have died this year, maybe more. I haven't looked at the latest. It's like a situation like here in New York City where they're just not even reporting the deaths out of Rikers anymore. It's terrifying. It was horrible. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your treatment in jail or some of the conditions? Is there any specifics that you can give us?
Sure. One thing that I just want to make everyone understand is that I wish I could say that our treatment in jail was worse than what tens of thousands of people in Atlanta deal with every day. That being said, that wasn't the case for us. We were very much special considerations in jail because they knew that people were watching. And everybody who passes through that jail in DeKalb County Jail and Fulton County is harmed. In DeKalb County, I'm going to speak more to DeKalb County because I was there for a month versus Fulton County, which I was only there overnight, although we weren't even supposed to be there overnight. At DeKalb County, one of the biggest things was that we did not receive access to fresh air or sunlight. We had in the 31 days I was there, I had 3 hours of fresh air and sunlight. We were served food that had mold in it, insects in it. One time we received food without eating utensils, so we had to figure out that situation. We were constantly surveilled in meetings with our lawyers. One time I was in a meeting with my lawyer, and of all the other things that we were talking about, I mentioned that we didn't have enough toilet paper or menstruation products for everybody in the pod. And as soon as I came out of my meeting with the lawyer, which, by the way, one of the people that I was in there with had been stuck in the lawyer booth, which is basically like a very small room with a window that you could talk to your lawyer with. You weren't even in the same room with them, and you had a drawer. It was this very tight and closed space, and they were left in there for over an hour by themselves after the lawyer left because the guards couldn't be bothered with opening the door and to let them back into the pod cage. And so once I heard that, I made my lawyer stay with me the whole time until I returned back, because I did not want that to happen to me. So I'm sitting there with my lawyers, talking to them about the conditions and that we were dealing with. And I mentioned that there were no menstrual products or toilet paper. And I came out, and one of the guards handed me 6 rolls of toilet paper and 2 big packages of menstrual pads to distribute in the pod.
So they have them on hand, they just weren't sharing them.
They have them on hand. And also, my lawyer visit was completely surveilled.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to talk with my lawyer without being surveilled. Like, it would have been a whole other process to get me out of the jail to have a meeting that was unsurveilled. So I didn't have private conversations between my lawyer and myself.
And what is did your lawyer take that up with them? Has that been raised to?
So at that point, my biggest concern was getting out.
Mm-hmm.
So I really didn't have a whole lot of time to think about all the other stuff, and neither did she. Yeah. And currently I'm dealing with some other things that we'll talk about later, that all of those kinds of human rights abuses. And I didn't even get, so people who were considered mentally ill, dealing with mental illness in some way, were put into solitary confinement in our pod cage, in a jail cell that had a glass window in the door, so they could actually see all of us, but they weren't allowed to come out. And so we literally had people going insane in those jail cells from just the solitary confinement condition. And one of them attempted suicide while we were there. And the only reason that they survived is that because myself and the other forest defenders were like screaming along with our pod cage mates, like screaming at the guards to come in and help her. And they literally came in laughing and strolling over to the cell to rescue her. It was a fucking game to them. It is insane. It's like, where does your humanity go? Where is it? Did you really sell that out for like 40 grand a year or whatever you're making, if you're making that much?
Yeah. Were the guards men or women?
Oh, all of the guards were women.
But the person survived.
The person survived that time. Yeah. I don't know what happened to them since.
Sick. It's such a sick system, sick, dehumanizing system.
We were dealing with black mold in our cells. We had constant leaks. And we had, at one point, I call it the pod cage because the guards called it a pod because the way it's set up, it's like, the area that I was in is DeKalb County Jail Southwest. There was like a guard room that was surrounded by windows. And then there were, I think, 4 or 5 branches of pod cages, right? And then one of them was the outdoor area that we could see from our pod cage because it was like a glass wall. Mm. And you could literally see the sunlight, just not feel it.
Did other prisoners get to go out into a yard or anything, and they just didn't do it for you? Or is that just like general policy for most people who are held there?
I was told by people who had been there longer than I that they just don't go outside, that they just don't do it because the guards felt that the idea was that the guards probably thought it was too much for them to do because they have to watch you, shackle you, bring you into the room, hope nothing. It's just ridiculous. And yeah, I don't know. And we were stuck there without books. Like, one of the things that people think about jails and prisons, and jail is very different from prison. It's in a lot of ways a lot worse, because prisons are set up for people to be there for long term. But as the state of Georgia and other places continue to hold people in pretrial incarceration, which is what we were, and it's not prisoners, it's incarcerated people, if you will.
Oh,
Because again, it's in a jail, it's not a prison.
right.
So we didn't get books, like barely got commissary. Sometimes we weren't even able to answer the phones for our lawyers. There was a specific phone for the lawyer calls, and sometimes they would keep us locked in our cells later than we were supposed to, so we would miss calls from our lawyers. Yeah, everything was broken. And then I heard from one of my pod cage mates after I left that apparently there was a whole gnat infestation that happened in the jail, because again, they have plumbing issues everywhere. One night our pod cage was flooded from another pod cage that was attached. All of a sudden, water just started coming in at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And then they brought other incarcerated people in to clean it up, and none of them were wearing they were all wearing like those slide sandals and socks. So they were cleaning up a flooded pod cage in contaminated water with no protections, and being told, convinced to do this by getting extra food, because we had so little food given to us. Like, we were literally fed twice a day. Like, I don't even call it a meal, because what they would do is they would drop off food twice a day, usually between 12 and 14 hours in between feedings. So all of us were like saving food that we could, because we would get like these little envelopes, packets of peanut butter and apples and stuff. Like, sandwiches. But luckily it was so cold in there. That's the other thing. It was brutally cold, and we didn't have the clothes at first to take care of it, or the blankets. We organized in our pod cage to get everyone to file complaints about the cold, so that we could at least get more blankets, which they finally did, I think 3 weeks after I was there.
Wow.
But that's crazy, because I'm an older woman. I'm going through menopause. I run hot. And it was the coldest that I had been in probably like 5 years. Like,
How many people were in the pod total?
so it came and went, because it's jail, right? So we would have as little as like 10 people in there, and as many as 40. And at that point, people would be sleeping on the floor and whatnot.
How many forced offenders were in with you?
So we were held in the women's section of the jail, and there were 5 of us in one. They split us up into 5. They put 5 of us in one, and these were like forced offender, whatever. It's just people who were arrested at the music festival. That's who we were. And so there were 5 of us in the pod cage that I was in, and then next door they had, I think, 3, and then across the hallway, I think there was 1 more. And everybody in the pod cage was very confused by us showing up, because we were mostly white people coming in, and almost everybody was Black, right? In the Black Mecca of Atlanta. And they were really confused while we were there. And then somebody that we went through holding with before you actually get to the pod cage, she told them what our charges were, because she was in the holding cell when we all found out what we were being charged with. But before we even got to the pod cage, they handed us our uniforms, and they brought all 5 of us into a room, commanded us all to strip naked, and then handed us our clothes one by one. Like, it was the most humiliating, and we had all been camping and stuff, and it was just awful. And yeah.
So sorry about that experience.
I have an extreme leg. I have a partially torn ACL in my left leg.
Mhm.
And I usually have to take like Aleve, anti-inflammatories to keep it down. It took 2 weeks for my lawyer to get me anti-inflammatories for my leg. Like I literally couldn't sit down. I had to beg for a bottom bunk so that I wouldn't have to climb up a ladder to get to the top because it was so painful to do.
Mhm.
Aleve, something you get at the bodega for 50 cents. Like seriously?
Around support for y'all on the outside, what sort of like movement support was happening? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
So I'm super lucky. I feel like I'm in the best situation possible as far as that. When I got arrested and my friends from New York City found out, they pretty much immediately just sprung into action and started organizing to make sure that I would have money when I got home, make sure my daughter was cared for and whatever she needed, they were getting for her. Again, my daughter has been a rock star. She's 21 years old now. She was 20 last year, going through college, has been amazing at supporting me and just tremendous assistance that again most people don't get when they're in jail. I literally can't understand how I would have survived that situation had it not been for my friends, extended family and community here in New York City. And also in Atlanta, a lot of people in Atlanta have reached out and are super supportive and have been a lifeline, and it's been really heartening and humbling to understand like how much support I have. And I also have the support of a really gifted lawyer in Atlanta and a handful of movement attorneys here in New York City whom I've known for over since Occupy.
Mhm.
So I have all the legal and material support I need. And now I'm working for two activist organizations, which are jobs that I would not have taken before this. Before I was working for Fordham University, and that was how I preferred to be in my activism, for it to be something different and not contingent upon about how I pay rent.
Mhm.
But now I looked for work for 8 months. I could not get work for 8 months. And
Oh,
I think that's because once they Googled my name, the Fox News stuff popped up
mhm.
and it was over.
Right. My other question is, when you were in jail, were you aware of or feeling that support, the support that was going on outside of jail?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Because I was calling my daughter every day and she was letting me know everything that was happening.
Oh, that's
So
great.
even when I wasn't allowed to go to my bond hearing, which is unconstitutional, I wasn't allowed to go to two bond hearings. Like they told me I was going, I got ready, I was all excited. I'm going to
Yeah,
court. I'm going
and
to
then
get out.
unconstitutional to be surveilling you while you have a meeting with your lawyer too.
Well, it's that too. Yes, yes. There's several layers here. Um,
Constitution free zone and the Atlanta legal system.
this is the country that was founded in genocide and colonization, and it just doesn't ever stop. It's going to keep morphing and evolving and focusing on the people who live in the country regardless, because that is the biggest business that the United States has right now.
Mm.
The military, policing, brutality,
Mm.
incarceration.
And just out of curiosity, how much was your bond?
Um,
There was extraordinary amounts of bond they were setting for people, correct?
yes, it was much higher for the RICO indictment,
Hmm.
but it was a large amount of money.
Right. And then my other question is, what has been the impact of the charges on your daily life? Seems like you alluded to a little bit of that, but is there anything else?
Yeah, you have to understand, I haven't been found guilty of anything. I haven't even been indicted on the domestic terrorism charge, which I think I'm just watching the news and I don't think that any of the other people I was arrested with on March 5th have been indicted either. The district attorney, Sherry Boston for DeKalb County, has recused herself on those cases. And nothing's happened with it, much like the Cop City Vote campaign. Employment
They're
was
just
super.
hoping it goes off. They're all just hoping it goes away because it's been such a political blemish.
Hoping it goes away. Like it might
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah,
make
yeah,
it
yeah.
go away. Just make it go away. You don't have to make it drag out for 5 years. It was two things. So when I came out of jail, like my brain was broken last year. out of that experience. So I actually had to give myself exercises to get my mind back to a place in which you and I could be having this conversation, in which I could be working a normal job and doing the work that I do.
Mhm.
There was a lot of recovery that was happening the first couple months after I got out. I kept getting lost in my own neighborhood. I've lived in New York City like almost 25 years. Why am I getting lost? And it's literally because we had like constant lights on, constant slamming doors, metal doors. Like it felt like I was living in the subway for a month. And so none of us have been indicted on this. And then in the case of the March 5th people, to varying degrees of the RICO indictment, we are very much in the midst of collective punishment, right? But we cannot organize collectively to fight these charges, which are only placed on us to silence support for the people of Atlanta who do not want Cop City built.
Yeah.
But we cannot organize collectively to fight a collective charge. And it's very unique to use no contact orders in this way. It's very rare to be charged with other people and then not be able to communicate with others charged in your case, which also brings up questions of constitutionality.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm unable to travel, even though I don't have travel restrictions placed on me by the judge who signed my bond order from Fulton County. Apparently, the Fulton County Pretrial Investigations Office appears to have more power than the judge, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's very unusual, it's capricious, it's cruel. My uncle, who is one of the most important people in my life, my Theo, and whom I was part of his care team before this, suffered a mental health crisis and is now dying in a nursing home on the Tennessee-Kentucky border. Mm-hmm. It was one of the only facilities my family could get him into with Medicaid. And it's far from where he lived with his wife in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And my brothers and I live out of state. And in order for me to properly try to actively help him or visit him, it requires a lot of preparation. I don't drive. I don't know anyone in this border town. And so I have to set up hotel stays and figure out preparation. But pretrial services wants me to propose dates for their review so that they can maybe approve them. And also so that they can alert the police in that small town to watch me. They literally said to my lawyer, we need to assure proper surveillance of Ms. Grim while she was in the area. Like, I'm going to be doing anything but visiting with my uncle.
So does that mean they have the NYPD doing surveillance of you now in Brooklyn?
Who knows? I don't know. I would love to know that. I am hyper aware everywhere I am. I do know that if I'm arrested again, I go back to jail. I'm not going to protest right now in actions because one, if I'm being surveilled, I don't want to endanger people around me. Mm-hmm. And also I might go back I don't want to go back to jail in Georgia. So I could set up my visit with my uncle, buy the plane tickets, set up my hotel, but then pretrial services could be like, oh, you know what? That just doesn't work for us. And so I'd be out like over $1,000. And this sucks because this man is the one who basically helped me become the woman I am. He opened the door to graphic novels, to poetry, to music and art to me. He was one of those guys. And I love him deeply. He's losing his mind. He's surrounded by strangers. He's feeling tossed out by life. It's monstrously cool. Right now, the biggest person that the state of Georgia is punishing is my uncle. Right. And I really don't even, he's 78 years old. He has a broken hip. He's blind. He's got a lot of mental illness that he's dealing with. And it's just cruel. But the thing is, I'm going back to, this is what people deal with every day through the experience of incarceration. Mm. People are separated from their children, from their families, from their communities, even when they get out. And it's connection that makes us human, and it's connection that wants us to be better people. If incarceration is even about you falling to the wayside of something, I think it's just a system that's just there to trap you into it. But let's just suppose it is about punishment for whatever crime is in a world of poverty that we talked about before. None of this is helping any rehabilitation of the spirit or the mind or the body. None of it. And I haven't been found guilty of anything, but I'm very much being treated as such.
Mhm.
And then even though, so I'm unable to prepare for my case properly right now. Even though Judge Adams set a deadline in mid-May for final discovery files to be delivered, I still haven't received it. I am unsure if my Georgia attorney has received it. I can't prepare. And for the first time in my life, one that has been dictated by calendar appointments, lists, preparation for everything from parenting to employment to health, I am flying blind in one of the most important fights of my life.
Right.
Again, millions of people dealing with this every day. And as to the discovery I have received, it is huge quantities of data, like much of which is not useful, and multiple duplications of files from 3 different agencies: the FBI, the Atlanta Police, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigations.
Mhm.
Which just, we don't have a New York Bureau of Investigations. This is something very specific to states in which enslavement used to be a system.
Right.
And as a data professional, it's been a nightmare trying to sort through all this stuff. I've identified at least 4 different file naming conventions, and none of them make sense even when you like put them up against each other to try and figure out what the convention is and why they've tried to use that. So it makes it hard to bring together things that would make sense, like at the very least, whatever they think is evidence against myself.
Mhm.
And again, people deal with this capricious cruelty every day, and it appears to only be getting worse. And I'm going to be dealing with this reality for at least the next 4 years, maybe 5 or 6, depending on how the trial for the RICO goes.
My one question I have, because I always like to put this out there, is how can folks who are listening to this show support you and the other defendants?
So there is a website that has popped up called
Mhm.
WilaniTheFree.org. There's also a
We can
link
put it in the
tree.
show notes too, by the way.
There's also a link tree called the Wilani Defenders. I don't remember what it's called, but
We'll add it. We'll add it. You can send
yes.
it to me. We'll add it in.
Yes. So there's the link tree of people who have identified need, who are part of the RICO in the different cases tied to Cop City in Atlanta.
Mhm.
Going out and engaging with public officials to shut down these other facilities that are being built around the United States. That's really important
Mhm.
because say Cop City doesn't get built in Atlanta, but you have over 50 other facilities across the United States. Like, we're still just terrible. And there's a website, I think it's called Is Your Life Really Better?
Mhm.
.net, maybe it'll be in the show notes. I'll give it to you. And it lays out the map of where all these facilities are so that you can like look and see and try to join an effort to stop them. It's really important because our police are more militarized than ever. They're getting out of date equipment from the military to use in our cities against us. Defunding the police is really important because they're defending us. Like, all of our money for education, daycare, library service in New York City is being given to the police so that they can rehab this donated equipment from the US military to be used on us.
Yeah.
Like, we're paying at St. Energy, which is one of the jobs I have. One of the things that is said in our collective is we don't want to be paid to be poisoned, right? By
Mhm.
fossil fuel products. We shouldn't be paying for our own brutality, which is what's happening when they hijack public money into policing. It's unreal to me that so many people had problems with the statement defund the police when the police are defunding everything in public life to protect their power and to build it.
Yeah. Yeah, completely agree with that. I think it's also, you touched on this before, is that we're seeing an economic gap widen between the ruling class, the 1%, whatever you call them, and everybody else, to the point where even what I would call like middle class privilege, whether it's white privilege or economic privilege for non-white people is with the crackdowns we've saw on like elite universities in the last 2 months is actually just an indicator that the people who are in charge are freaking out. They don't know what to do. We're in these crises. We're in an economic crisis. We're in a pandemic. We have a climate crisis happen. And we've been seeing these movements for the last 25 years or so really rising up. To me, it goes back to the World Trade Organization protests in Seattle in 1999, but
Absolutely.
and the 9/11 is like kind of thrown in there, but they don't know what to do. And so their only response is to like militarize the police, put more money into the police, take money away from public services. Part of it is also just to like fatten their pockets or whatever too. But it's just like war on the poor and war against people who are speaking out against the poor getting screwed over. And now they're building, 60 cop city facilities around the country based on the Israelis repressing the Palestinians. It's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and also in a way, it just makes a lot of sense. And to me, it's also how just the system was completely designed. Like it's to like repress the mob of people who are like unhappy with the way things are going.
Absolutely.
So that's my soapbox for the day.
No, but the only bit of hope that I can find in this right now is that you have a whole slew of people in the university repression who are completely radicalized now and completely see that system for what it is.
Right.
And I'm hoping that means that they're going to pivot their priorities to demanding that at the very least we defund the police, and at the very best we find a new system of care and compassion that actually solves the roots of every crisis that we're facing right now. We're literally fighting against corporations right now, like
Corporations and billionaires.
corporations and the kings of finance.
Yeah.
That's who we're fighting. And yeah, the Chris Carr, the Georgia Attorney General, liked to call everybody that was arrested in the Stop Cop City effort, outside agitators. But the real outside agitators are in boardrooms across the world right now, because they're multinational corporations, everyone from FedEx to Wells Fargo to Chase. Oh yeah, that's another thing. I lost my Chase account and I lost my Airbnb account in this. They are very much outside agitators from every single city that these things are being built, and they are very much invested into the building and the fruition of all of these. And so that's why it's so important. Like, this is one of the most important. It's everything. It's environmental racism. It is the police industrial complex, the prison industrial complex. It is what happens to our public resources. It is, do our elected officials actually work for us? Are they actually listening to us and responding in kind? It's completely intersectional, this struggle against these facilities being built.
We're getting towards the end of our time. I'm wondering if there's last things you want to say about the Stop Cop City struggle before we wrap. You've already told people what they can do, but just any other.
Yeah. I mean, the Georgia police literally assassinated a young person for being an activist.
Mhm.
And that's only the start. At Columbia, the police brought a school shooter. My daughter is 21. And I don't know. And also, we're looking at a country in which, in over half the country, if you become pregnant, your life is literally in danger, because you can't forget about being able to get abortion as healthcare. You can't get basic healthcare as a pregnant person if anything terrifyingly wrong goes wrong. Yeah. You're all of a sudden facing having to leave a state to get actual health care, and hoping that you're close enough by to a place that you can go to a hospital that will actually take care of you. We're in a revolutionary moment right now, and it is up to everyone to look at every piece to modern life that is being dismantled in deference to dictatorship, and figuring out how they can become a part of the struggle to bring a world, again, filled with care and compassion and not cruelty, because that's how we open the door to make sure that people are thriving. Like when we're thriving, we're going to be making better decisions for each other. We're going to be more innovative. We're going to be able to be as healthy as one of the things in the indictment that they talk about is they try to make mutual aid seem to be a criminal enterprise. But the thing is that trees in a forest, if one tree is dying, the other trees send nutrients to that tree through the mycelium network underneath the forest floor. Mutual aid is integral to human life, to all life, right? It's just, this is not the time to even think that politics doesn't affect you, because it very much does in every moment of your life right now. Cars are being used, cars which we have all been pushed into thinking that we need to own outside of public transportation, is now basically like a target for the police to pull you over whenever, and you might survive the incident, you might not. It depends if you are of color or not, right? It's just the fights are so large, and we're not able to have basic worker rights that they have in other areas of this planet, like unions. We're at a critical juncture, and right now everybody just needs to figure out what and how they want to plug in, how they want to be a part of building this better future for everyone, and what that looks like, and just to have empathy for others. Where empathy, care, compassion, these are the things that need to be prioritized, not guns and surveillance.
Yep. I'm going to leave it there. Folks, we've been talking with Priscilla Grim, who is a longtime activist and organizer and is a Stop Cop City defendant. You've been listening to the Green and Red podcast. If you like what you're hearing, please check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to us on one of the many audio platforms we're on, give us a rate and review. It helps us with the algorithms. And then also, if you really like us, please make a donation at greenredpodcast.org and hit that support button, or become a patron at patreon.com/greenredpodcast. Priscilla, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate it.
Yep. And everyone else out there, make trouble and misbehave. And as you've heard today, that's what we need right now. So we'll talk to you all again really soon.